All right, a couple more people might come through, but I'm going to kick us off and get started. So, hey everyone, my name is Maddie. I'm from Magic Brief, and welcome to our webinar masterclass, How to Coordinate Paid and Organic Social. It's such a hot topic of discussion among marketers and such an important one to have in this era of social media in 2024. And there truly is not a better team to speak on this than Jackson and Max from Darkroom. So, just some quick housekeeping for everyone who is in the call. Please use the Q&A function in Zoom to write any of your questions, and we will get to those in our Q&A at the end. I will be moderating the chat as we go and just ask that if you are posting something publicly, please be very kind and respectful to the panelists so that everyone has a good time. But before I hand over to them, I'm going to give a quick intro on Jackson and Max. So Jackson is the co-founder and CCO at Darkroom, and he has led creative strategy for a very impressive track record of brands, which he'll touch on in a moment. And Max leads growth strategy at Darkroom and is a true performance and brand marketing expert, which we are about to see in action. I'm going to switch off my camera now because, like I said, it's 1 a.m. here in Sydney and you don't need to see my tired face. So I'm going to pass it on to the guys to take it from here.
Thank you, Maddie. Really appreciate it and really excited to be talking about this. We nerd out on this topic all the time, and we're in the middle of really unpacking a lot of this theory for our own company and for our clients. And so this isn't, something that we've baked and has been in years in the making. This is a really hot topic, to your point, because of the increasing costs of advertising and the amount of media that people are consuming on a daily basis. So we've had a few different titles for this talk, but what we're going to be talking about is integrating paid and organic social. I just got back from Japan, so like Maddie, I'm a bit jet lagged or off. I'm not 100%, so please bear with me and forgive me if I start to rant a little bit. We have about 30 to 40 minutes to go through the actual deck, and then we'll have Q&A. I definitely want to make sure we have time for Q&A because I think that can be even more valuable than some of the slides. So feel free to screenshot anything that's in the deck. I'm going to try to speed run through some of the slides so that we can get to that Q&A portion. And if we need to, or if anyone wants to go back to a specific slide or a particular topic, I'm happy to do that, obviously. So Max is going to be presenting for me, so I'm going to be saying next slide. And Max, you can go to the next one. So just a little bit of a baseline on us. Maddie gave us a great introduction, but just so you can see some of the brands that we work with at Darkroom. Here we work with 7, 8, and 9-figure companies, mainly on growth strategy, paid acquisition, creative strategy, and creative production, which includes, design, video editing, etc. And we've personally and privately invested in a number of startups that are in the e-commerce ecosystem, whether that be in MarTech or CPG brands or things of the sort. And so you can see some of these examples here. And a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today was born out of real pressure that we've received from our clients and just in the marketing landscape in general. Like I mentioned, CPMs and advertising costs continue to rise, which brings down the profitability for a lot of brands. And so because we manage those programs for our clients, obviously they look to us for guidance. And frankly, they put a lot of pressure on us. And so this is existential for us as it is for our clients. And that's why we're so kind of passionate about this topic and why we're trying to understand it for ourselves. You can go to the next slide, Max. Oh, by the way, Max, we're going to be this is going to be a little bit informal as we get into this. I'm going to throw it to Max on some of these slides and he'll talk about some things. And Max is obviously super technical when it comes to on-platform and paid social, but he's also got an organic background. And so, you can trust what he has to say. Max, if you just want to give a little wave.
Yeah. Yeah, hey everyone, my name is Max Showalter. I'm our Senior Director of Growth Strategy here at Darkroom. I oversee our growth services, which extend from organic to paid acquisition marketing to creator. So I'm really what you would describe as a 360 marketer. Come from a really extensive startup background, so I'm excited to talk to all the various stage companies that we have here about how you guys are going to be scaling your organic and paid efforts.
Cool. Thank you. You can go to the next slide real quick. So these are some snippets of our work. We pride ourselves on having a very high bar when it comes to creative and media. And so our team is doing everything for our clients across the customer journey. We like to say that we can impact the entire customer journey, which is where we feel like we get the most leverage for our clients. Like if you're running advertising, you also want to be able to dictate things like landing pages and website experience. And you also want to be able to dictate email and SMS and retention. And these things all work together. And so, over the past 7 years that we've been in business, we've increasingly gone deeper into that thesis of being more full service, being more omni-channel and more integrated as a result. And so I think this whole conversation with organic and paid is just super relevant for us. You can go to the next slide, Max. So just to talk about the bird's eye here, I noticed in the chat that there are a bunch of organic social managers and coordinators. There are people from performance marketing agencies and people from the data side. And so that's what I would expect is like these two types of people. And what we want to do, the goal of this conversation and what we're talking about at Darkroom a lot internally is how do we get those two types of people, the folks that are very performance and data minded and the people who are very content, culture, organic minded onto the same plane and in the same conversation. So our goal is to get marketing teams to understand the benefit and the functional application of how to integrate organic and paid social motions as much as possible. So I just want to say that this is not a brand versus performance debate disguised as organic and paid. We believe that brand is ultimately a performance function, actually, and both organic and paid contribute in building brand, and they can also both contribute to actual performance and bottom line dollars in the bank account. And I think these two statements kind of sum up the general thesis. The first is that creative, whether it be video, image, landing page, UX experience, whatever the customer is touching at the end of the day, creative is one of, if not the biggest lever to actually enabling new customer acquisition profitably, okay? And the second statement is that for any consumer brand, but definitely for any e-commerce brand, one of your biggest points of leverage is your operational efficiency, meaning your margin and basically how you can get the most high value reach at the lowest prices. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how we think about that and how these two things, organic and paid, play into that. Max, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, jumping in here as well. One of the big things that I'm hoping that everyone on this call can walk away with is Jackson and I are going to spend a lot of time demystifying this thought that paid and organic are separate entities that exist on opposite sides of the spectrum with each other. I think particularly over the last decade, as we've seen brands lean in very heavily to both organic and paid, they're thought of as these very separate silos. You have an organic funnel and a paid funnel. Well, we're going to talk a lot throughout this entire presentation about you really only have a funnel. There are different channels of engagement across paid and organic, but all of that is your marketing funnel. And I would encourage everyone on this call, whether you're from the organic or the paid side, to think that the other side, whether organic and paid, is a critical piece in your funnel, and it should all be working together symbiotically.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really well said. That reminds me, I just want to say that, hopefully some of these slides you can screenshot or you can pull ideas from, whether if you're an organic social and you feel really siloed from your performance team or from the general kind of performance lens that part of your company might look at things through, maybe your CFO or someone like that. Hopefully you can take some of these ideas to to bolster what your role is and what the KPIs that you're looking at are. Like, hey, this is important for performance. And then on the flip side, if you're on the performance side, maybe this will help you understand how you can leverage organic to actually affect brand and conversion. Okay, cool. Let's go to the next one. So there's a lot of text on this screen that's probably hard to read. I'm not going to like read all of this text. I'm actually going to go quite quickly through this, but this is one of those things that you're welcome to screenshot and look at later. I just want to define these terms a little bit. Organic and paid social. So organic social, what we mean by that is media that is published free of charge on platform and then amplified according to that platform's algorithm, as opposed to paid social, which are media placements that you're paying for in exchange for that media to be shown to a specific audience with specific interests, right? And so really, we're talking about Meta. Meta is the most efficient advertising platform on earth. And so it's kind of what we're talking about here in light of today's discussion, although that obviously translates across all advertising platforms. And so really the underlying differences, the fundamental differences are pretty clear in how content is distributed depending on the mode, whether it be organic or paid. And obviously with organic, there's traditionally been this term that we call dark social, which just means it's harder to attribute actual conversions to organic media because there's less data available. And so in that attribution row, we kind of talk about that a little bit. And I think that's why a lot of brands, rightfully so, invest more of their time, focus, and dollars on paid social because the ROI is much easier to see. I put in $1, I get $2 back. But in today's landscape, putting in $1 may not necessarily mean you're getting $2 back. It may mean you actually are getting negative dollars back potentially. And so this is why this is becoming a more fruitful discussion to be had. Now, one thing I actually want to say is that the reach and distribution mechanisms for organic and paid are actually a lot more similar than we might think. So on the organic side, if you think about this, every platform, whether it be Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, whatever, they are moving much more towards an interest graph as opposed to a social graph. And this is kind of like inspired and enabled mainly by TikTok, which is almost purely an interest graph based platform where they're showing you things that they think you want to see based on how long you're spending on videos, what videos you like, what you comment on, what you share, etc. All of those signals. Instagram, in order to compete, has had to skew more towards interest graph as well, although it is still, heavily a social graph platform at the same time. And so I don't know about you guys, just anecdotally, I actually spend a lot more time on my Explore and Discover pages than I did even 2 years ago. And it's because the platform is getting so good at showing me what I want to see. On the paid side, this is what you're paying for. You're paying for the platform's ability through AI, machine learning, and other signals to show your content to people who are the most qualified based on what the platform thinks that customer wants to buy and is in market for, or might become in market for down the line. And so actually, when you think about those two things, like basically you're creating content, you're putting it on platform, and that platform is trying to serve it to the most qualified audience. And they're just different ways of doing that. And so actually they're a lot more similar than we may have been led to believe in the past, and they're becoming more similar in that respect. Max, do you want to say anything on this?
Yeah. And to that point as well, talking about the similarity between organic and paid social, I think it's really important, particularly speaking directly to the organic social managers on the call right now. Organic algorithms dictate how those paid algorithms are going to work down the line. I'll use TikTok as an example. TikTok has built a really strong platform for virality and user engagement through this short form video content. and their ad platform didn't launch until around a year later. So a lot of these platforms, whether it's TikTok or the Meta platforms, actually use their organic platforms as a way of data collection to understand how users are going to be behaving once they start to integrate into their or launch their paid ad funnels or paid ad platforms. So it's really important for the paid marketers on the call or performance marketers to look at the way that the algorithms have been working in the early stage on organic and in present day to understand how you should be targeting on paid. Another point that I want to hit on as we talk about attribution, I think particularly for performance marketers, we can get into this cycle of consistently looking for the cleanest attribution, looking for external attribution tools to say, this is exactly where a purchase came from, by who, and when. And in an idyllic world, that sounds awesome. Performance marketers understand that that's not the reality of the situation. So where I would encourage the performance marketers and organic social marketers to work together is think about what type of brand you want to be building. Are you focused on the brand that you are so reliant on performance and all of your sales are going to be coming through these paid funnels? If so, I'd encourage you to take a really deep look at your business model and ask yourself the question, am I participating in a race to the bottom because I'm just focused on customer acquisition? Or am I thinking about the brand very holistically and playing the long game to build your brand up as a legacy brand as opposed to one that is entirely reliant on the paid social algorithms?
100%. Yeah. And as you go to the next slide, Max, I just want to say, like, this is where the framing internally at your company becomes so important, because we just talked about a lot of like functional aspects of this, but just culturally internally at your company, if you have this mind where you're integrating both organic and paid, and you're actually more just focused on creative, and then you're distributing that creative per channel or per medium thoughtfully, you can cross-pollinate so many learnings from what's working on organic and translate that to paid. And there's just like, we'll talk about this feedback loop, but that feedback loop for your team just gets stronger and stronger. And so that's just a framing that needs to happen internally at a brand. Okay, so now I think this is where things get interesting. So I'm actually just gonna kind of verbatim read this text on the sides here. So all content, no matter the channel, requires many of the same resources to create, which can and should be shared to achieve cost leverage. So if you think about this idea that every piece of creative that you publish is an investment that you're making, and your company wants to see a return on that investment, you need to actually calculate what your investment is accurately. And a lot of companies only look at their ad spend, and maybe they're starting to look at, the amount that they spend for UGC as a part of that calculation. But a lot of brands don't actually include salary cap and overhead expenses when it comes to their creative, which kind of mangles the actual equation of their customer acquisition cost. Because if I have $20,000 of salary cap going towards my creative, well, that's pulling down my margin, and actually it might be hurting my return on investment. And what I see a lot of times is brands will have performance marketing teams and that are very much held to an ROI and ROAS standard. And then they have organic social teams, which are just sort of, they view it as like an activity that must be done week over week, but there's not a ton of, ROI attributed back to that because it's difficult to do. And so I think this is where companies can actually get a lot more cost leverage with regard to their media. So if we just look at this, shared talent needed is really the same between organic and paid. You need a creative strategist, and that person really should be the heart and soul behind all of your media. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more in a second. But you obviously need copywriting, design, video, and then either user-generated content and a budget for that, and or higher fidelity production, whether that be photo shoots, video shoots, etc. So both paid and advertising, as well as organic media, require those shared resources. So you might as well just keep them all on one team. The only difference between the two is you might need one additional resource to do things like community management when it comes to organic, or on the paid social side, someone who's a finance media buyer person. And so I think this is like a simple idea, but I actually don't see it done in practice a lot. And then I just want to call out some of these creative KPIs. Here on the organic side, we've learned that shares and reshares are just as important, if not in some cases more important, than the amount of comments and likes that a piece of content gets. And so what that's doing is it's creating digital word of mouth, and it's actually bringing more awareness to you as a brand because people are sharing that content on your behalf. And so there's more amplification. And I would say that follower growth is somewhat of a vanity metric. However, the more followers you can amass, obviously helps amplify your content whenever you push something out, because the platform is showing your content first to your followers. And if it does well within that cohort, it's then being amplified further and further and further amongst other cohorts. But it also signals that you're creating content that is resonating to the extent that people actually want to follow along and treat you as a media company, really. And so I think that's just important to remember. And I know, Max, you had a point about CAC to LTV along those lines. So I just want you to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, the concept of a race to the bottom for brands that are just focused on profitability on paid social. Both Jackson, I come from a founder background. Obviously, Jackson is a founder at Darkroom, and we've talked to countless brands, whether it's through our own clients or our own personal ventures, that are working with private, either venture funds or private equity groups, in trying to raise additional capital. A lot of these private equity groups are looking through the lens of a CAC to LTV ratio. Typically, we're looking at a 3-to-1 CAC to LTV ratio is a really strong metric that we're looking at. And how that's relevant to organic versus paid. There are end goals on organic and end goals on paid, broken up by CAC and LTV. So on organic has the potential to reduce your customer acquisition cost, but it also acts as additional engagement point to increasing your LTV. And this is where I see organic and paid really start to split off in terms of their value. Paid social is very focused on profitable customer acquisition cost, period. You'll see a lot of media buyers that will include existing customers in their paid campaigns, and they're basically getting like a double count of a purchase. Customer acquisition cost ends at paid social. Organic social is your only way to really engage with your customer after they have purchased, to keep them as a lifetime loyalist for your brand. So I mentioned the concept of legacy brands earlier. The brands that can merge both paid and organic collectively and understand that one piece of that puzzle is acquiring new customers, another piece of that puzzle is making the acquisition of those new customers as profitable as possible, while also extending their lifetime and purchase volume as a consumer for that brand, is really where you are going to establish yourself on the same tier as the legacy brands that we talk about, like your liquid deaths in the space.
Yeah. And I mean, you might as well fold in email and SMS to that conversation as well. Like, all of these channels serve some purpose for customer acquisition as well as customer retention. And like, a follower on organic is similar to an email subscriber in that sense. And one other thing I just want to tack on to what Max just said, there's like this famous statistic that a potential customer needs to see about 7 touch points of creative before they decide to convert, whether that be a video, an ad, a landing page, what have you, a billboard, whatever. And so this idea that, all paid social is direct response is just, it never really was the case, and it certainly is not the case any longer. And so you just have to realize, like, someone will see an ad, they will inevitably either go to the website and begin to consider their purchase, which could be a months long process depending on your AOV, and or they will go to your organic social feed and use that almost as like a landing page to vet you as a company, to consider what product they want to buy, if they want to buy, look at comments. All of these things matter when it comes to actually converting that customer. Let's go to the next slide, Max. And so, to Max's point at the top of the call, really you have one large funnel, and you can get fancy downstream and create more specialized and streamlined funnels for yourself, but really you have one large funnel. And so when you think about organic from a performance lens, you can really start to unlock very important business objectives that make your business more healthy. And these are 6 of those chief points. So the first is consider the 95-5 theory. This is the theory that essentially 95%, give or take, of your total addressable market, so your potential customers, are actually in market to buy your product right now at any point in time. So there is no actual demand driving those people towards your product. They're just people that potentially could convert sometime in the future, years from now, potentially. Whereas 5% of your TAM are actually in market and considering who to purchase a product from. And so when you realize that, what you don't want to do is be putting a bunch of spend behind top of funnel ads that are being served to this 95%, because you're getting a very, very low return on your investment when it comes to those people. You're having to educate them and basically generate demand with those dollars, as opposed to if you had kept up a very frequent cadence of organic media, you might be able to gain that awareness, educate customers, and bring them into your funnel for cheaper. The second thing is, and this leads to that, which is you're able to improve your middle of funnel. So the more, this goes back to what I was just talking about with the 7 touch points. The more media you're putting out on a consistent basis, the more touch points a potential customer has with you, and the more they are building a mental case as to why they should choose you when they go to actually purchase a product. The third thing is that what you can start to do as a team is create revenue resilience. Really, the ideal for any business is that you have 90 to 100% of your new customer acquisition coming from organic sources, right? That's like the holy grail. That's obviously not realistic, but if we can aim for over 50% of customer acquisition to be generated organically, that is obviously more healthy than having to rely solely on pay to play. If you were to take away your paid ads, how much daily revenue would drop off? That's a question that you can ask yourself. And similarly, are you relying more on promotions and sales and discounts and offers? Or can you rely on brand and perceived value? And organic is a great way to do that. The fourth thing is create a more efficient go-to-market. So we were just talking about email subscribers, obviously organic followers. These are not necessarily truly owned audiences, but you can definitely think about them that way. And having that audience that is following along with you is just such a stronger way to test ideas, to promote products that are new and get a signal back. Is this something that your customer base wants and is going to actually convert on? You can start to get early signals of without having to put paid spend behind that. The fifth thing is gaining more leverage on partnerships. I'm going to speed through this one because I actually have an example about this later on from Dr. Squatch. But the more media you're putting out that's not purely advertising and salesy, the more other brands and influencers will be keen to partner with you, and therefore you can gain their reach from their adjacent audience. And then the final thing is building up off-site SEO. So SEO is a huge topic when it comes to organic, but a lot of people just think about SEO when it comes to your own website, maybe your blog or your, the web pages on your site. But the more media you put out on platform, the more potential a customer has to finding your product or your brand when they go to search for something, whether it be a solution to a pain point or something that's culturally relevant or what have you, they're going to find you on TikTok and Instagram at a higher likelihood than your competitors. So these 6 things really, really important and super helpful to kind of make the case for why organic and paid teams should be talking together on a daily, at least weekly basis, and kind of creating this combined funnel strategy.
Yeah, and very briefly, I want to touch on point 6 here. For everyone on this call, I want you guys to ask yourself the question of how is it that my ICP or ideal customer is searching for our brand? If your ICP is someone that's younger, I would encourage you guys to look into the way that younger millennials and Gen Zs are using a platform like TikTok as their go-to search engine compared to something like Google. In 2023, TikTok overtook Google in Gen Z as the #1 go-to search engine. And you can see that very clearly personified when you log into an app like TikTok. You can see how the app and algorithm itself has actually been built around that search functionality. So ask yourself the question, when we're investing in something like SEO, where is it that my customers are actually searching for us? And that should allow you to better target your SEO strategy.
Yep. Okay, I'm just looking at the time and I want to be cognizant of this. I know I talk a lot and I'm definitely still jet lagged. But this is a good slide to kind of screenshot and just think about. I'm not going to belabor this too much, but what I will say is what I'm trying to get across here with this slide is back to that fixed cost team structure concept. One way to think about how to form your team and create this integration at the same time improve your margin is to back into how much content you should be publishing, whether through organic or paid, on a weekly basis, and then figure out what human resources you need to get that done. And is that more efficient than if you had hired an agency or used freelancers or what have you? So for example, if your brand would benefit from launching 2 to 3 new ad concepts per week to test, and wants to post 5 to 7 times on organic social to test and figure out what works, you can kind of start to back into what is the average cost per piece of content that you're paying on a monthly basis, by kind of taking your total salary cap and dividing and reverse engineering that. And so just quickly here, I've got like 3 options. These are not the end all be all. They're just ideas for you to think about. On the left side, you've got a very efficient way of doing this where you basically have one person who's a jack of all trades. And there may be some of you on this call that are expected to brief all of the creative, film yourself on an iPhone and be in the creative, do all the editing. You're literally doing pretty much everything besides the media buying and maybe the community management. For smaller brands, and especially for like fashion brands and some other consumer brands, this is a great way to go if you don't have a lot of capital. The second is having a strategist and a design editor combo person. And I highly recommend this, even if you're doing 7 to 8 figures, because the rest of your costs could be variable. And that might be a better way to achieve an ROI on your content. And then the third is to have all of these people in-house: strategist, designer, editor, creator, manager. Obviously, this is the most expensive, but if you're trying to scale beyond 50 million in revenue, certainly beyond 100 million in annual revenue, you're going to need to be producing a ton of content. And so at that point, it's probably more of a cost advantage to have all those people in-house. The last thing I just want to stress on this is that none of this stuff that we're talking about is really possible without a creative strategist who is the heart and soul of this team and is obsessive about the cultural zeitgeist, trends, obviously your product and your customers, and is the one who is kind of encouraging the rest of the team to take risks and be as creative as possible, but understands what type of content traditionally works for organic, which is like non-salesy, more entertaining, more educational, but also can copyright and brief for advertising, which obviously needs to convert customers. Okay, cool. I'm going to pass it to Max to talk more about the functional components of how to actually do this. But I would just say that we've been talking about this creative feedback loop, creative flywheel idea at Darkroom for a number of years. Everyone on this team that I just described should be on this same feedback loop process, which goes through everything from creative strategy all the way down to data analysis and then repeating that cycle. And that is truly what enables you to learn from what's working on organic and then thoughtfully apply that to paid, whether it be one-to-one, you're taking something that was published on organic and putting it in an ad set, or you're splicing and dicing and tweaking and taking the best hooks, the best calls to action from organic and putting them in advertising in a more, I don't want to say Frankensteined way, but a thoughtfully Frankensteined way that makes for better advertising. So Max, I'll pass it to you and you can kind of talk about where Magic Brief fits into this equation.
Great. Awesome. Let's go ahead and jump forward. Before we get into the importance of Magic Brief and having a really strong data analytics tool, the question that's posed at the top of this webinar and very frequently is, how can you use organic to fuel your paid funnels? And that's really the question that we're seeing pop up very consistently. So there's a couple of points that I'd really like to drill down on. The first being paid media buyers. There's a best practice of launching testing campaigns, particularly in Meta, under the train of thought that it doesn't make a lot of sense for you to launch a organic social test and it's much more advantageous for you to launch a testing campaign because the paid algorithms are drastically different than what the organic algorithms are. So what you'll find a lot of brands in the consumer space are doing are they launch these testing campaigns with a sizable chunk of budget where they're running through various different types of creative to understand what works in the testing campaign and then moving the winning creative over into their evergreen campaigns. So the end goal of that is to increase the probability that the consumer will automatically choose you when they're in market for your product. So the way that we execute this is, instead of actually going in platform and testing out a creative concept that you have in this testing campaign, I would make the argument that it's much more advantageous for you to launch these tests in organic social. If you're trying to understand whether or not a particular hook is working or a particular type of content is working, it's best to go to your highest engaged audience to see if you're hitting on the points that make the most sense to them as loyalists to the brand. Where paid social sort of gets this wrong, I would say, a lot of paid media buyers will default to using interests or different demographic types on paid social. But those are generally just suggestions within the ad platform. The surefire way for you to get a quality data set and point of understanding from consumers that are resonating with your brand is for you to test out that content from organic and pull data from your organic tests into your paid social strategy. From there, we talk about outlining tests and looking for those signals. So what are the signals that we're looking for if we're running a particular test on organic social? And the question that you should ask yourself then from there is, what placement in the funnel would this piece of creative fit into? For example, if you're looking at top of funnel, one of the metrics that you should be looking for that gauges your success on organic social is something like total impressions, thumb stop rate, and click-through rate. Whereas if you are looking for more of a bottom of funnel test, that's where you're going to want to look at your engagement metrics. You're going to want to look at comment sentiment, shares, and saves as an example. I had just mentioned the paid social data analysis. So we really dive in on the ability to reach adjacent audiences more efficiently by leveraging larger partnerships. So Jackson's going to talk about this a little bit as we get into our Dr. Swatch example later. But aside from just using organic as a way of testing out pieces of creative for your performance funnel, there's also a very strong use case for partnerships that comes from building up a reputable organic brand. Anything you wanted to add to that, Jackson, before I jump?
No, I just want to mention, like, these two pieces of creative on the side here are good examples of creative that we made for this brand based on what we were seeing people save and engage on the most organically, that we put into an ad set. And so there's, like, on the left side, you have this piece of creative. You probably have seen this type of creative on Instagram or even Pinterest if you are interested in fashion. And on the right side, we have, I don't know if you guys saw the Finance 6'5" guy trend. This was like a few months ago. But we, stole that basically and created an ad out of it. And so these pieces of creative performed super well from a soft metric standpoint because it felt platform native. We knew there'd be a strong hook, et cetera. And so for top of funnel, this was much more effective creative than anything else that we were running because we took those signals from organic. So I just wanted to call out why we put this creative on this slide.
That's great, which that brings me directly into an example of how you would be able to leverage this. Jackson just talked about the content that performed well on that previous slide. Something everyone should be aware of as these paid social algorithms start to update and take more signals from organic. There is a time and a place for a highly curated ad if we're talking bottom of funnel. People like to see your magazine, high quality style content, but where we're seeing a lot of the shift happen right now is your ad should feel more like an organic feed or an organic post that you would come across on any of these organic social platforms. The last thing a consumer wants to be hit with, especially during this time, is a paid ad. In fact, we're seeing engagement rates on paid ads sort of plummet, but where we see the engagement start to spike is when the point of the creative is not holding a gun to the consumer's head and saying, purchase the product, but rather saying, this is a piece of content that is funny or provides education or value outside of driving you to make the actual purchase. So let's talk about a way that we could actually test this. So step one is we want to publish a piece of video content on TikTok or your organic Instagram feeds that feels like it fits in the organic feed. Your focus here is on really strong content quality, making it feel relatable, but also this is your avenue for you to be able to test your different captions and hooks. From there, you want to set out to monitor the content that has those highest success metrics that you have set out based on your funnel placement that we discussed previously. We're talking top of funnel. We want to look at things like organic views and shares. From there, you want to add that content to a meta ad set to basically like a Reels placement, so you can capture that top of funnel audience. This is where paid media buyers can become really intentional in their performance and campaign structure, leveraging the Reel style assets and Reel campaigns to see a different type of engagement that feels more organic as opposed to something like an Advantage Plus bottom of funnel conversion campaign. You'll be able to get a lot more top of funnel metrics coming through Reels. Moving on into this third step here, you're going to run all of these tests. You are relatively limited by the type of data that you are going to get, whether it's from Meta or Google's ad platforms or the insight tabs on TikTok or Facebook or Instagram. So you want to have a very strong tool that can analyze your highest performing creative, which brings me into Magic Brief. Darkroom uses Magic Brief as a way of pulling in metrics that don't exist natively within your platform, but have provide very strong indicators of whether or not creative is performing at a certain level. An example of this, we spend a lot of time on the growth team looking at things like thumb stop ratio, through play, and click rate. It's really difficult for you to gauge something like thumb stop and through play on an organic or paid platform. They're not metrics that natively exist within those platforms. After you are looking at your engagement metrics like we just discussed, you should be taking your highest performing creative and putting it into that creative flywheel that we had just discussed. You want to analyze and understand at what point were people dropping off, at what point did we see the highest engagement, and iterate upon that as aggressively as possible. Because where people start to slip on the paid side is they have a top performing creative in their paid funnels and they just leave it. There is so much room for you to grow after you have identified a top performing ad. Once you see a top performing ad that's viable for scalability, you should be more aggressive than ever in making as many different iterations to increase and scale the performance from that highest performing benchmark that you'd set. Jumping into data and insights, I just mentioned the advantage points of using a tool like Magic Brief. We use Magic Brief on every paid acquisition campaign that we're running because it gives us much more granular data. And there's a couple of pieces of data that I really want to hone in on as we're talking about success metrics. CPM is something that is truly the bane of the existence for a paid media buyer. CPMs is not something that you generally have a ton of control over, but impacts the profitability of your campaigns a lot more than most paid media buyers would like to give credit to. Where do CPMs start to go all sorts of haywire, and where does organic fit into this? The more targeted you get on Meta, for example, you add in interest groups, locations, different audience demographics. That is something that is going to jack up your CPM. And while that's great, as I mentioned earlier, those interests and targeting thresholds are really just a suggestion that you're giving to the algorithm. So if you have a way on organic that you know your audiences are engaged in a similar demographic that you would be targeting on paid, a good question to ask yourself is it going to be more cost effective for me to test this out on organic instead of paid? Additional metric here is we talk about the high through play rates. Those higher through play rates, while they show a higher sentiment of overall content, that's also going to give you a higher purchase intent or highest purchase volume and click rate. So aside from looking at the basic metrics of click-through, impression, and ad spend, I would encourage everyone on the call to spend some time looking at what the through play rate and understanding what pieces of data that can give you so you can further iterate upon that style of content because there are higher points of engagement. Last point here on data and insights. We use the functionality of Magic Brief called Copilot daily. To toot Magic Brief's horn here, they have a bunch of advanced functionalities, but one that I like to use a lot is their winners functionality within Copilot. You can set different thresholds, whether it's scaling spend or a particular ROAS goal, while you input custom date ranges. It will take all of your existing campaigns in creative and run it through those particular thresholds of success metrics and spit out what is your winning variation of creative. So for paid media buyers and organic social specialists, it can take a lot of work for you guys to individually sort through each piece of content, put it into a CSV or spreadsheet, and then run all of that data manually. It's going to save you time and effort partnering with someone like Magic Brief that has this Copilot functionality that essentially kicks out your winners without you having to do all of the manual work of heavy data analytics. Awesome. I'll pass it over to Jackson to talk through a couple of examples.
Okay, cool. We're coming up on time. I want to make sure we have some time for some questions. So I'll run through these really quickly. I just want to say, Dr. Squatch, really strong example for organic and paid integration. Highly recommend going to their TikTok, their Instagram, organic feeds, as well as looking at their meta ads library and just seeing, how they might be cross-pollinating learnings and kind of leveraging both channels and mediums as a way to create that combined funnel that we talked about earlier. And you can see this investment in organic just by the amount of followers that they've amassed versus their competitive incumbents. Like you look at Axe and Old Spice, I think Dr. Squatch has like 4x the amount of followers across platforms than those brands. They recently did this campaign with Sydney Sweeney, but I encourage you all to go back through the history of their organic feeds and really look at how they built up to this point, because obviously getting a macro influencer like this is not cheap. But at this point, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm sure there's a ton of ROI on this because she's in the limelight right now. She's having her moment. And so this is, if nothing else, stopping the scroll really well amongst their core audience. And then you can see, if you go to first of all, look at the amount of views that they amassed over these organic posts. This is just on Instagram. So I'm sure there's crossover from TikTok and Instagram, but I mean, just on Instagram, they've got over 8 million combined views and almost 350,000 shares across just these 4 posts that I pulled. And they have more from this campaign. So imagine how much they would have had to spend if they were spending an average CPM of anywhere from 15 to 20. Maybe they could have gotten a $10 to $15 CPM, but likely more expensive. So Obviously, that's way more efficient, and they're paying for the influence of Sydney Sweeney instead of that CPM. So if you go to the next slide, you could just see that they're using a lot of this content in their paid programs as well. And it's not one-to-one. They're putting things on Meta and YouTube ads that are different. But what this does is once you enter this funnel, you're getting hit with all of this Sydney Sweeney campaign content, and it's starting to kind of craft a story and keep you in that moment, which should inspire a purchase after a few touch points. That's the goal. And if you go to the next slide, I just want to point out that, we talk a lot about video, and video is definitely a great way to, bolster your efforts on organic and paid. But this brand, Vacation, is one of my favorites, and they lean heavily into static design, which just requires way less resources. You could probably get away with having, 2 people internally, one person writing the strategy and the copy and one doing the design. And the reason I laid this out this way is because they're actually using a lot of this creative one-to-one on their organic feed and their paid social. And so I bet you couldn't tell me which ones were just ads and which ones were just organic. And the reason that this is working is because they have such a strong design ethos that feels vintage. It kind of takes you into another world or another time. And people on visual platforms like Instagram really appreciate that aesthetic. But it also serves as really effective advertising as well. And this is a much smaller brand than Dr. Squatch. Let's go to the next slide. I just have a few more references because I think we're all visual creative people here. References are gold. So here are a bunch of brands that you can screenshot, and I highly recommend looking at their Instagram, their TikTok, their Pinterest feeds, but also their Meta ads library, their Google ads library. Look at what they're doing on YouTube. Really, really awesome stuff from these companies. Great. Full disclosure. So we're going to go into Q&A. I just wanted to say this. I forgot to mention this at the top of the call. We don't provide organic social as a service at Darkroom. We do creative strategy. We do growth strategy. We obviously do a lot of creative production work. But we don't have a vested interest in talking so much about organic. We really just believe that the integration of these two things is super necessary for brands to remain profitable going into 2025. So, I just want that to be said and understood. But yeah, happy to answer any questions and even go back to any of the slides if we want to go deeper on the topic.
Sweet. I've got some questions in here. So 2 kind of in the same vein. How do you hit the balance between making the creative as an organic post and the CTA to make them purchase the product? Or similarly, what if your top performing organic creative isn't related to performing your product? Like maybe it's a founder story. How do you kind of marry up both of those 2?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is going to be a little awkward because we're both going to jump in at the same time. I'll just say this. I'll say that it's hard to say without actually looking at creative. I think it's easy to think to yourself, man, okay, do I need to take the hook from this video and the body of this other video and kind of like mash them together to create like the ultimate ad? Maybe that could work depending on the creative, but remember that this is a combined funnel. So, what I would probably do is I would look at your highest performing organic. I would ask yourself, could we remake this, but use the original spirit of the hook and the theme, but make it more salesy and more of an ad for conversion purposes? And use that in our top of funnel campaigns, our prospecting campaigns. Not every piece of creative has to do the full job of like getting their attention, selling the product. That would be great and super effective. And obviously sometimes that can be the goal, but just remember, if you're capturing attention and entertaining a customer and they're interested in your brand, now they're in your funnel and they're going to see more from you. And so there's a multi-pronged approach to actually selling that customer over time.
Yeah. Next one that was written in the chat, is there a benchmark of a budget split between user acquisition versus brand spending that you would recommend, or a framework you would use for that decision making?
In terms of benchmarks, that a lot of that is really going to depend on where y'all are at in terms of your business. So when we're talking about like exact spend splits, I think that's pretty difficult for us to say. What I can say when you're talking about the split between user acquisition and brand spending is understand that the two of them, as we addressed earlier, really go hand in hand. So I wouldn't be so dead set on splitting a budget that is solely set aside for user acquisition versus a budget that is solely set aside for brand spending, because as we mentioned, that sort of splits these silos back into the two that we were mentioning merging at the beginning of the call. I would think about your user acquisition funnels and your brand spending as something that go together collectively, because that sounds like a very whoever wrote that question, that sounds like a very like performance-based question, and I hear that because I live within that realm. We're often trying to figure out how can we acquire customers, and what are they converting, what funnels are they converting through, what piece of creative is getting them over that threshold. But think to yourself that consumers are people, and I think that that's where marketers tend to really deviate, is we think about this through the lens of an ad funnel, as opposed to we are adding additional points of engagement to make sure that people are more aware of the brand. So to answer your question very directly, I wouldn't split those two budgets. I would keep them existing as one collective budget, and then you can build your strategy out based on what makes the most sense for your brand. If you have a user acquisition issue, you should be spending more of your time figuring out how you can be the most efficient with that budget to acquire as many customers as possible. If you have a top of funnel awareness issue or brand issue, you should be investing in pieces of content that perform the best organically and are going to be the most profitable for you to increase your share of voice.
Nice.
That's a perfect answer. I just want to, sorry, Maddie, I just want to say that's why we have the slide on team structure, because it's actually easier to justify that spend when you look at it as one thing and you're like, okay, we have these shared resources. We might as well be producing content that can work organically and then translate that to paid. And Maddie, I know you had this question about, where do we invest time and money depending on where we're at as a brand, especially if you're a newer startup, you have less resources in the form of time and money. I would say first, you should recognize what your strengths are as a team. So if you know and are confident in your ability to create high performing organic content, really entertaining stuff, then I would put a lot of my chips into that early on, because the more conversions you can drive organically and set that up as like your culture and like the underlying business fundamental for you, that's incredible. And that's going to make you the healthiest business long term. Frankly, and most companies do not exist in that bucket. And so early on, I would scale to 7 figures and even beyond a $10 million annual revenue rate through meta ads by just capturing that 5% of people who are currently in market and have the demand. The demand is there, and you can justify the ad spend to capture those people because it will be more efficient. Once you move into the next phase as a business, you're going to have to cross over from that just being able to tap into that 5% of your total addressable market into that 95%. And that's where you're going to need to do what Max just said, which is invest more in brand and top of funnel organically.
Amazing. That's time, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. I am going to send a recording of this to everyone in the next 24 to 48 hours, and make sure that if you want to chat more about this with Jackson or Max, DM them, get in touch. And if anyone wants to chat about Magic Brief, I think my email is on the event invite. So feel free to email me and I can take you through any questions. Have an epic day, guys. No matter what part of the world you're from, I'm going to bed.
Go to bed. And feel free to DM us. Like, we're happy to talk to anybody free of charge. We love this topic. So hit us up. Happy to chat.
Amazing. See you, everyone.
Awesome.
All right,
Thanks, y'all.